Billy, thank you for joining me on Headstrong.
Thank you for having me.
Monday morning, bright and early.
Bright and early.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
Very good.
Firstly, I know it happened back in the 2024. I mean, has it settled in yet? Like, at what moment did you go, damn, I broke the record for Ironman as a double amputee? That is mental.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't really sunk in. Like, it's kind of been a weird sort of few months for me, really, because the event happened back in October. And now everything's sort of building up towards the documentary coming out. And actually, the whole reason for me doing it in the first place was to raise money for Comet Relief. And now that documentary is coming out where hopefully we can, grab everyone's attention and raise as much money as possible. So it kind of felt like even though I did my bit, like in terms of getting the challenge done, and obviously it all went to plan, that we've still got a lot to figure out. And obviously I want to race as much as I can.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like it's almost, you've done that part of your life and it's coming up again.
Yeah.
And that's also the way that, films are coming out and they film it, and then a year later it's like, right, let's do the press. It's like, do you remember filming it? And you're like, no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you end up doing other stuff in between. Yeah, there's been a bit of a funny period, really.
I want to start by actually talking about the recovery of the event, because everyone is probably thinking about the gruelling preparation, which is absolutely bang on, but in pretty much 14 hours of non-stop exercise, you're burning thousands of calories. It's absolutely, as I say, grueling. But run me through the 24 hours after you crossed the finish line. What was that like?
So the 24 hours after the finish line, so I finished, like you said, it was about 14 and a half hours the event took. I think I ended up finishing around 10 p.m. So I'd say first hour, maybe 90 minutes afterwards, like you're full of adrenaline. You've just done this thing that I've been training for over a year. So like, there's all this adrenaline. I'm seeing all my family, all my friends, everyone that, chipped in some way to help get me there on the start line in the first place. So like you're kind of riding that high. And then I remember after about an hour or 90 minutes, I just started to feel really like tired and weak. And
I think we'll let you off.
Fair enough about the tired part, but we were kind of like, okay, we're going to head back to the hotel and sort of, get ready to crash out. And I remember I'd taken my legs off after the event. So my girlfriend was pushing me in a chair, and we were going through like a hotel lobby where all the sort of admin around the event was. And we went over like this tiny little, like not even a speed bump, but inside like the hotel. And I remember being in my chair and my ribs, the like pain I had straight away in my ribs. I was like, oh my God, like going over that tiny bump, I feel like in agony. It's like all the little muscles in between your ribs, all of those muscles from where I was, your heart rate's going high for that long, were in agony. I was like, it was just such a weird, strange sensation. So anyway, we drove back to the hotel, got back into like bed, and I remember just being in bed, like shaking, like, and I was like thinking, what's going on here? My girlfriend was pretty concerned for me. She was bringing my trainer up whilst I was in bed going, I'm not sure Billy's in the best shape here. Like he's shaking like uncontrollably. He's got horrendous rib pain. Eventually managed to get to sleep, and then I've woke up in the morning, and it was quite a quick turnaround for all my team who were out there with me. They were straight into work mode again on the Sunday morning, and I remember coming down and just having a chat with them, and like I was starting to feel a bit better, showing them all my cuts and blisters, and they were like, "Oh, some of them didn't look too pretty."
Go on, tell me about your body, the feeling after that then. So you'd at least caught some Zeds, but then what? Were your legs were they swollen, mashed up?
They were pretty cut up, yeah. It was on my right leg here, I have like a bit of scar tissue on the inside of my knee, which is always a little bit temperamental, but because of the actual event itself, I had like loads of like blisters underneath of a scar, just cuts from the prosthetics. Like you make them as comfy as possible, but there's going to be some wear and tear on the body when you're moving for that long, where it's hot environment as well, like you're sweating, it's just, there was a lot going on. So I was kind of expecting to be in a bit of discomfort. I'd probably say the discomfort it was more of an annoying discomfort afterwards. I didn't feel like my body was like broken to the point where, I was never going to be able to feel normal again. But there was a lot of parts of me where I had cuts in inconvenient areas, which meant that me and my family, we were staying out there for a few days afterwards to actually just enjoy Hawaii when the event was done.
Yeah.
And it felt like, oh my God, like I thought I'd be relaxing on a beach and it would be, lovely, this part. And all I can think about is, the effects of doing the event itself, and I'm just sort of getting my way through the next few days.
Mate, 100%. Can you remember the first thing that you ate?
First thing that I ate, actually, so in the evening, everyone was telling me to eat something straight away before I left that hotel because there was a bit of food on display, but I really didn't want to eat anything.
Yeah.
So I was like barely picking at, I can't even remember what it was, like a bit of chicken or something like that. And then in the morning, me and my girlfriend we were like, right, I want McDonald's breakfast. I want McDonald's breakfast. We couldn't get one delivered to our hotel because our hotel was too far out of town. So I was absolutely heartbroken.
Gutting, I suppose, if just particularly after, I know that you will have had cheat days, but a year of training, you're like, that's a bit naughty.
Yeah.
But that day after, yeah, you get what you want.
Yeah, exactly. We did get McDonald's later on in the day, but yeah, the McDonald's breakfast plan was a fail.
That is gutting. What about that mental side of it then? You must have been going through a whirlwind. Was it relief, exhaustion, pride, everything at once? And did it come at different times?
Yeah, when you're like doing an event that's that long, so like just moving for 14 hours and not having like any like headphones or anything like that, you are in your own mind. So there were moments throughout the race where like my mind would start to wander, and then like especially when I was getting closer to the finish line, you start thinking about finishing, seeing your family and everyone, and obviously I was going for that record, so it was like, am I going to make it? Because it was so hard to track where I was at with that. But yeah, it was a strange sensation, I'd say, like actually during the event. Then when I got to the finish line, I saw everyone, and it was just pure like euphoria, and it was just like relief as well, because I always felt like when I did this challenge, when you're doing it and how you do it, it directly impacts others. So like the fact that there was that charitable element to it, and that I didn't want to let everyone down, because I knew how important the money that hopefully we'll raise is going to be in, helping other people. That for me was like a weird feeling during the event, because it was like, as much as I, put pressure on myself and I want to do well for me, because I put in all this hard work, equally like I didn't want to let people down. So it was a bit of a weird feeling at times, where it was like that would creep into my mind. I was like, right, no, you don't worry about that. That's like not within your control. You just need to focus on doing.
So were you using that as motivation?
I'd say so, yeah. It's been my motivation throughout, is knowing the good we're trying to do from doing the event. Like obviously being able to go for a world record and do all that stuff, it's cool, it's exciting, but that wasn't the fundamental purpose of the whole project. It was for comic relief. It was because I see the good they do, and I just wanted to be a part of that some way.
No, it's fair enough. Was there a moment then, I know that we talked about it now and it's almost not hit you, but you finish that and it's like, then life does carry on. You're in Hawaii for a couple of days having a nice holiday, and it's like, hang on a minute, I've just done an Ironman and broken a record. Like life almost just carries on, you know what I mean? But and I'm not saying that you want to be like, check me out, this is what I've done, but what was that experience like after?
It's I kind of had prepared myself for that sort of feeling after doing an event like that, because I did that first comic relief challenge. I felt like afterwards you kind of feel like, oh well, what do I do now? You're in this sort of limbo feeling where you've done this really incredible thing, and you're thinking what's next, but you need to let yourself have some time. And I always find it such a interesting and hard thing to navigate. And I think you see it a lot of, with a lot of Olympians and Paralympians. They go through a very similar thing. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but it is like a form of depression that some like people experience when they do like an event of that sort of scale. And then afterwards there's like, that gap, because Ironman training for me the few months before, particularly last 3 months, was about 3 hours a day, plus all the stuff that isn't actually training, like recovering, eating, doing all that. So it just takes over your life. So for the last 3 months leading up to October, I was just obsessed and all in on that one thing, like nothing else mattered. And then that was done, and it was like, oh, I've got all of this time, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
So it was an interesting period.
It is very, very interesting to just think about it, because you're like, you've actually stopped, right? But during that race, as you said, there are moments where your mind does wander. Obviously, you can't be solely knuckled down for 14 hours. I mean, that's pretty nuts. But was there a moment where, because you must go in peaks and troughs, were there moments of, I can't do this?
There were definitely moments where I was going through stuff that I'd never gone through before, even throughout training. Like training for an Ironman is one thing, but when you're on that day and you're doing it for the first time, like I'd never run a marathon, for example. alone, let alone as part of doing a full
Yeah,
Ironman.
start easy then.
Start easy. So I remember distinctly coming off to the end of the bike, and for the last 40 kilometers, it's 180 kilometers of bike, but for the last 40 kilometers, I remember being pretty like low on energy, thinking I need like a boost. And I remember the last couple of kilometers coming back into town, and all of a sudden I'm coming to the end of my bike stint, and you're seeing people out on the marathon running. And it was that sort of feeling of, oh my God, I've got to go and run a marathon now, and I've not done that before. So that was like one of those moments where, you're questioning, can you do what you're setting out to do?
And so in that internal monologue, how do you answer those questions? How do you stay on top of your mindset when you do have that doubt?
I think for me, it's been about like this whole journey has been very new. It's been very different. But I think what I kind of have realized from like my sporting background, like before with racing and everything like that, like I think everyone sort of questions themselves at points in time. Like I think it's just sort of normalizing that in your brain. And that is, that sort of has been built across a year of training for me, where I'd had individual training sessions, for example, where I was getting to moments where I was like, I don't know if I can, do this, hold this power, run that fast. So like all those little wins where, your mind's been questioned throughout training, you've sort of overcome that. I think all of those individual wins across, a long period of time stack up, so that when you face, you're facing that challenge head on the day, it was like, okay, well, I've overcome that thought process, in training multiple times. So I've just got to kind of do that again.
How, it sounds ridiculous, but how do you keep going when it gets tough? Like, are you, in terms of onboarding fuel and food, what does that process like to somebody who has never run a marathon, let alone an Ironman? What does that, even just the planning of intake of food to get through that? Because as I said, you're burning so much, you have to onboard.
Yeah, honestly, it's like the fourth discipline in sort of Ironmans and triathlon. It's not just swim, like run. Nutrition is massive. And I was super lucky that throughout this process, I've been introduced to people that are like leading experts in their fields. So I haven't had to sort of, I guess, make this up, from just, what I think would work. I've literally been given, plans in place where people are like, this is, you need to be taking 100 grams of carbs on an hour. I'm like, okay, that's a statement. How do I do that? What does that look like? It's gels, it's, liquid carbs. It's at the end of the race, about 12 hours in, I could not do, and the gels that I had been taking for the first 12 hours, I was sick to the stomach of them. I couldn't, like, just the thought of taking on any more gel was like, no, my body just didn't want it. So they have flat Coke at the aid stations. So I'd be just going along, drinking 2 cups of Coke. So there was, in those moments, I was a little bit flexible, but in general, it was kind of set in stone. It was something that we practiced throughout training as well, where it was like, okay, you need to take 100 grams of carbs in an hour some way. Yeah. It's all gels and liquids and stuff like that, which, yeah, I was very, very lucky that people told me how to do it, because it's such a minefield.
Mate, for sure. When you are actually in the race, then you talked about there, when you're coming in, you're finishing on the bike, and then you're seeing people doing the marathon. It is so very difficult for anyone to not compare. Were you there going, oh, they're in front of me, they're comparing? Because even though you're in your particular predicament, being a double-amputee, that is, you'd still be comparing, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Did you feel that?
I guess I did slightly, but again, like you say, given the circumstances of being a double-amputee, like I kind of knew I was sort of in a race, by myself really, and like the record was like, the thing I was up against, and also like I was up against like myself. Like I think when you're going for an event of that scale, it's so easy to, it would be so easy to look at other people and look, oh, they're coming past me on the bike, like they're going to be done so much quicker than me, this, that, and the other. But I think it's important as much as possible to just actually stay focused on what you're doing.
Sorry, I have heard you say before that you're not a massive fan of exercise, particularly before this challenge, or even indeed your first challenge. How did this one actually come about? Let's talk about the origins of it. What was obviously I know that there are multiple motivations of the charitable element, then actually breaking the record, doing it yourself. But how did it come about?
So basically, you're right to say that I didn't like exercise. That was definitely something that a position that I found myself in a few years back, probably realistically when it was COVID time, so in 2020. because before COVID, all my sort of physical exercise like that I did was based around being quick in a racing car and being not at a disadvantage to my competitors. So as long as I was fit enough that I could get in my racing car, I could handle the G-forces, I could handle the strain, I didn't feel like my physical ability was holding me back in any way. That was where I was happy being. I didn't want to do any more than that. Like, I just wanted to be solid in the car and not be at a disadvantage. And then when COVID happened, my racing season basically got put on halt, like a lot of things did. And I remember sort of going, oh, well, I know I'm not racing for this year. It's COVID, so I could just eat a little bit unhealthily if I want to. I can, I don't have to worry about training, this, that, and the other. And then a few months go by and it's like, right, okay, I had that sort of moment. I looked in the mirror, I was like, Bill, this is not good for you. Like, being like, just letting things slide just because you're not, going to be racing this year. So then I started to get into the gym and actually just try to find, the enjoyment in bettering myself and doing physical activity. Then my first Comet Relief Challenge, I got approached to do that one back in 2021, just when I was basically at my fittest. I'd sort of gone through this sort of full circle where I was like, I got really unhealthy and then I got fitter than when I was competing, just because I actually started enjoying the process of getting fitter. So the first challenge happened. The first challenge was a great success, and my trainer afterwards, who trained me for the first challenge, he said that training for something like this, like having big goals like this, he thought brought the best out in me. And he said, would you be up for doing something else, like another challenge? I was like, yeah, for sure. I was like, I need some time off. Like, my body was broken after the first Comet Relief Challenge, which in the grand scheme of where this challenge was, feels like nothing. So he went away, came up with a list of about 8 or 9 different, things that he thought I could potentially have a go at doing at some point in time. And I went through the list and they were all really cool challenges, like cycling the whole Tour de France like route. But the only one that had some form of a record attached to it was the Ironman in Hawaii at the World Championships. And me being just that sportsman, that competitor, I was like, yeah, world record. I've never thought you could be a world record holder. I've never thought that about myself, and it just started to get the cogs turning in my mind, and that's where the sort of idea sort of came from back in the end of 2021. So yeah, it's been a few years in the making.
It's very interesting to hear that from kind of like a professional athlete's mindset. You're like, you were given these incredible challenges and actually you were like, yeah, I need one with the, the opportunity for the biggest success almost, because that's how no doubt your mind is framed, having raced from such an early age and kind of grown up with such competitiveness in your bones.
Yeah, and I've always been against the clock. Like, racing, it's about those milliseconds, it's about those fine margins. And when I was looking at that record and I saw, there's a time to beat, instantly I started dissecting, okay, like, I think my, from at that point in time, I'd done a tiny bit of swimming, did some cycling for the first challenge. I was like, okay, if I held this speed, I'd be able to get the bike done in roughly around this time, which would leave me this for a marathon, this for the swim. So instantly those sort of mental calculations, that sort of whole process started to happen.
And when you actually did first start running after your accident, after even 5K, you were kind of getting cut up even just then. So when you were committing to doing this, like, was there worry about kind of how your body was going to react? Because as you said earlier, yes, you can train as hard as you can, but you can't actually do a full Ironman practice run. You're not doing a 14-hour practice, you know what I mean? Because you don't know how your body's going to cope.
Yeah, running for me out of the 3 disciplines was always, when I signed myself up for this, that was the one that I was most worried about. And that's because I'd had some experience in a pool, and swimming for me was a bit of an escape in a way, because when I swim, I don't wear any prosthetics. So apart from the fact that I can't kick with my legs, it feels like, it's just me in the water. I don't have to worry about, those sort of extra things that, using prosthetics can sometimes, throw a few problems in there in some regard when it comes to looking after your body. The cycling, I had a bit of experience cycling, nowhere near the distances, nowhere near the speed, the efficiency, everything like that. But I knew I could get on the bike, go out for a bike ride, a short bike ride, and feel like my body wasn't broken afterwards. But the running, like you say, 5K, I'd done that, in the first, instances of running on prosthetics after my accident. And I remember distinctly feeling like really cut up and sore, and I wasn't really sure how it was going to get any better. I
Mm.
think that was the thing, I guess, with the running that scared me, was like, okay, we've got this problem. The prosthetics, they rub, they get sore, my body breaks down. And I was thinking straight away, if my body breaks down, if I go for a 5K run, how am I meant to balance doing how many hours of cycling and swimming a week? Like, I need to be in a position where I can go out for a run, and if I've got to go for a swim in the afternoon or a bike ride, that session isn't going to impact those.
Mm.
So it was a real juggling act, and I think it was probably the scariest part of the challenge for Comic Relief as an organization as well, because I'd set this huge goal. They were investing all this time and belief in me doing this challenge. And I remember being sat there in meetings in sort of October of last year, and kind of saying, okay, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this run. So instantly they're coming up with backup plans. They're like, okay, well, let's get you in a recumbent race chair, and maybe you can do the marathon in that instead. And I was kind of like, but if I can run on prosthetic legs, I want to run on prosthetic legs. Like, I want to, my idea with the whole event was, I want to do this as close to how an able-bodied person would do it. So I didn't want to be, in a different, on a different bike, because I knew I could cycle an upright bike. It meant that, because the guy that did the previous record to me, just for a bit of context, he did the cycle in a recumbent race chair,
Right.
which meant that for the marathon he had fresh legs effectively. But for me, I was putting myself, I guess, at a slight disadvantage, because I was like, I want to do 180 kilometers of cycling using my legs and then go and run the marathon. But it's just the way in my mind I sort of envisioned it happening, and it was really important to me to kind of keep that as true to that vision as possible.
When you're training then for this, how do you actually train your mindset? You talk about there locking in your sessions for your cycling, your swimming, your running. What was the mindset training for this? Because it is a huge physical feat to overcome that you need huge resilience for.
Yeah, massively so. I think the training for an Ironman has taught me a lot of things, and I think actually just pure time management is definitely one of those, because I feel like, most people, in our lives, we always, and I found myself doing this all the time, going like, oh, I don't have time for that. It's easy to think that we're all too busy to do these things, and all of a sudden, when you've got to find 3 hours a day plus, going to and from sessions, recovering and getting prepared before the sessions, like, it takes a lot of time out your day. So when I was away working, doing my presenting work, it would take a lot of sacrifice and resilience to not give up and not to take the easy option, and to try and plot and plan how I was going to get everything done to the best of my ability. So that was a huge lesson in all of this, and it was a big learning curve, to say the least.
What was the biggest mental barrier that you had to overcome? I have read that in an Ironman, you're not allowed to listen to music. That is a huge one as well. And I know that you implemented that into your training.
Yeah.
But was there anything that you were particularly, focused on in terms of mental mindset and resilience?
Yeah, I think, like you say, touching on the music, I think that was something that after the first couple of months of training, so probably, early of last year, that was, at that point, I made a conscious decision to try and avoid listening to music when I was training, because I found myself just naturally, the first couple of months of training, that's straight away what I did. It was like, okay, music in, nice distraction. And then, when I sort of, read into it and saw that you couldn't listen to music, it just didn't really make any sense to be training in a way that wouldn't correlate with what I was going to potentially feel on the day. So, that was definitely a big factor in that decision.
What have you learned about yourself, most importantly, about this kind of experience?
I feel like I've always felt like I'm capable of doing stuff, but I think this just reaffirmed that even more, like the fact that I can, call myself a world record holder, that I know that I can do hard things. Like, I've felt that before, but I think this just sort of reaffirmed that to sort of the next level, where I think, because it was such a scary, daunting challenge, I maybe now look at day-to-day life and I don't see things that maybe before I would find a bit daunting or overwhelming as overwhelming anymore, because it just kind of puts it into context. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, I dedicated a year. I did that crazy thing that, not a lot of people thought was possible. So, this thing that I've got on a random Tuesday it shouldn't hold so much control over my thoughts and my feelings.
Naturally, anyone does experience self-doubt, and you said that, during the race there are moments where obviously it's going to creep in. But I want to talk about, just briefly, about before the challenge, and you talk about, even their contingency plans of other people doubting you. Is he actually going to do this or not? How do you feel about when you hear the not the doubt as such, but I understand any challenge has a backup plan, but how do you cope with the idea of doubt and people's not, yes, they think you're going to finish it, but also, hang on a minute, we've just got to, just in case, have this. How does that make you feel, like that doubt of others?
I think like it's a natural thing for people to doubt whether you can do something or not, because we all doubt ourselves, so it's easy to just throw that onto other people as well. I think what I realized at the early stages of planning for this challenge is that if I doubted myself, you give other people even more reason to doubt you. So I had to kind of have that sort of self-belief in my head that this is doable, and I had to keep reaffirming that within myself. And naturally, throughout the process of preparing for this, I found that because I was reaffirming that and I was so sure and so strong in my belief that I could do this, naturally I found that sort of came onto other people, and all of a sudden people that were asking questions, planning for backup plans, they weren't worried about those backup plans anymore, and they were on board. So I think that was something that I realized. I think before I signed up for the challenge, I was at a bit of a weird period in my life where I was kind of like, I didn't really have like a sense of purpose as much as I would have liked, and the challenge really gave me a chance to focus on something and to really just delve 100% into that, which I think, again, I just really thrive off as a person. So yeah, for me, it was all about when I was having, those self-doubts in that sort of interim period before starting the whole project. I was like, okay, well, if I sign on the dotted line, if I'm doing this, I need to believe it's possible, because no one else will believe otherwise.
Yeah, and you can't exactly half do an Ironman. You're all in.
You're all in.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose on the other side of this, as you said there are some people that have to do this contingency planning, but then you've also got this amazing team around you who instill self-belief in you, who have the utmost confidence, whose job it is to make sure that you do finish that. What is it like? How important is the team actually? Because whilst you're the individual doing it, it's a far bigger picture.
It's none of it would have been possible without the people that I had around me. It's so important whenever you're doing anything like that to surround yourself with as good people as possible that add value to what you're doing. And I think everyone that was a part of this project on my team added value in areas where I needed it. So my trainers had the experience, the knowledge. They would give me the training plan to go away and execute. They weren't doing the sessions for me, or a lot of them they weren't doing it with me. It was left to my own devices, but they were giving me the tools to succeed. The same with everyone that looked after my nutrition, everyone that was planning the media and the logistics of all the events, speaking to Ironman as a company, and plotting my route to even qualify for Hawaii, because I had to do a couple of half Ironmans to prove that I was going to have a chance of breaking this record to even get on the start line itself. So there was so much work that went in behind the scenes, and it would have been overwhelming, and I don't think achievable to plan and do that as a single man operation. So I was just so glad that I've got the people around me that I do. It makes such a difference.
And then just the added element then of documentary. I mean, talk about a little bit more pressure. That's wonderful. Tell me about that experience then. Did that also provide motivation for you as well? Was it therapeutic conducting it as well?
I think having done one Comet Relief Challenge and made a doc for that, I realized the power that the documentary has in terms of engaging people and getting people to invest their sort of time and to support the challenge financially, which is obviously the big goal, the overriding goal. So I think I looked maybe at the documentary slightly differently this time, having done the first one, where I was like, as much as sometimes you just want to crack on with training and there's all of a sudden there's cameras and you've got to get mic'd up and you've got to do all those things, and it's eating away at the time in your day, and you're thinking, I haven't got much time anyway, like to fit training in and all like sort of day-to-day stuff. So sometimes like it's easy to, get caught up in like, oh my God, all these people are here. It's taking up all this time. Everyone's sort of got eyeballs on you. I don't want to fail and be embarrassed in front of people. But equally, those raw moments throughout the sort of year of all those learnings, those wins, those losses, everything that went well, that went badly, like I think that is what tells the story in as close to its full capacity as possible. So that for me was something this time I was probably looking at it a bit differently, where I saw it just for the value it added rather than, getting caught up in all those little things of like, oh, this is, taking up time or whatever.
What do you hope people will take away from the documentary?
I hope that the idea of a double-amputee doing an Ironman is, I feel like that's a bit like doesn't make sense in a lot of people's minds of like being able to, swim, cycle, run, do all this, stuff in this crazy environment and, go out and break a record. But like, I'm just a normal person who's, driven and just like wants to succeed. And I think if I can convey anything, it's like everyone has that same, possibility out there. Like if you set your mind to something and give it your all, like anything is possible. So for me, that was, a big motivation as part of this challenge was like, obviously I wanted to do this for myself. I want to do this for Comic Relief to raise money, but I also want to try and empower as many people to think, well, why can't I do something like that? Why can't I better myself? Why can't I, find an hour of a week to or an hour a day to go to the gym? Those are the sort of things I think if we can create a bit of a positive feeling where people feel empowered from watching me go through my struggles to then want to take on something themselves and better themselves, like that's like a massive win for me.
No, I mean, if that's not convinced you, I mean, I don't know what will. When can we watch it?
So it's going to be going out in the week of Red Nose Day, so March, middle of March this year.
Amazing. No, I mean, looking forward to it. Can you remember that the first thing of what someone was said to you? Was it the doctors? Was it family? What did you wake up to? What was that first experience, at least from what you can recall?
Yeah, so it's always a bit of a tricky one to recall exactly because I was on so much medication at a time. I remember like, having like visions and all sorts was going on because I was, basically up to the eyeballs on medication because of how serious my injuries were. But my accident was on the Sunday afternoon, and sort of my first proper memories, I think they took me out of the injuries coma that they'd put me in when I had my accident on the Wednesday. So about some point on Thursday, roughly, I remember, well, I don't actually remember this, but this is a memory that I've been told from the people that are around me. Also, I was in a race when I had my accident, and my mum and my dad and everyone was in hospital with me. And I remember apparently when I came around, one of the first things I did, I asked for a bit of pen and paper because I couldn't speak because I had tubes all down my throat and stuff. And I wrote down on a piece of paper who won the race that I was in. So obviously I look back on that now, I go, why on earth was I interested who won the race when you're going through this horrendous thing? But again, that's just the sportsman in me, and that was just where my mind went to. And then quite quickly after that, the memories are sort of, me, looking down in hospital, being in hospital bed, looking down and seeing sort of empty space at the bottom of the bed and knowing, okay, like, I'm not sure if that's just me, but that doesn't look right. Then having the conversation with my doctor, which was a big moment of sort of that realization setting in, and everything like that.
Can you tell me about that conversation? Because, it's enormously difficult, even for these medical professionals whose job it is to deliver that news. But it is, as you say, life-changing news, but they did it in such a way that almost instilled positivity in you.
Yeah, massively so. Yeah, my doctor, Tom, he was incredible. I had, a whole number of surgeons, but he had a military background, and he was, luckily for me, when I had my accident, in that civilian hospital where he worked when he wasn't, doing his military services. But he'd done, I think over like 20, 30 amputations out, in like Afghanistan and stuff like that. Like, so he was like, in terms of someone having to handle, someone coming in at 17, having these serious injuries, he was the perfect person for it. So I was just super grateful for him and Tony and all the surgeons that looked after me, when I needed it most. The conversation itself it was fairly brief, but it just framed everything for me in a slightly different way to, I think, how it would be easy to frame it in your mind if you were left to your own devices. Obviously, if you hear like you've lost your legs, like it would be so easy for panic to set in, to start questioning, like, what's my life going to look like? Am I going to be able to do this, that, and the other? And rather than like me sort of spiral those questions in my mind, he basically answered them like straight up to me in that first conversation. He was like, obviously you've lost your legs, but if you work hard with your recovery, if you do this, you focus on that, you'll be able to have independent walk, you'll be able to do like live a normal life as close to as possible. And it just got me thinking of, yeah, actually, rather than just looking at the fact I've lost my legs and like I've lost them, they're not coming back, what have I still got to, be appreciative of? And yeah, those things were then what I sort of try to focus on as much as possible.
It comes down to mindset again, doesn't it? But and I understand the severity of what went through. How did you control the doubt also that stepped in and the negativity? Because there is the opportunity in that situation for anybody, let alone like an athlete and sports person, to slip into depression and really start to suffer with their mental health. How did you kind of assist your own mental health in those kind of first few weeks?
Yeah, I think it was rather than focusing, like I say, on what I'd lost, it was focusing on what I still had control of, and fundamentally I still had control of the effort that I put into my rehabilitation, and I still had control of keeping my mind open to all sorts of possibilities. One of those was obviously going back to racing and stuff like that. I think sport definitely, and that competitive streak definitely helped me when I had my accident, because rather than sort of being down in the dumps, it was like, what can I do to make things as good as possible? And those conversations just started to happen. I started to talk to people about the possibility of going back to racing with my friends and mechanics and engineers, and it just kept me thinking of what was still possible rather than now what wasn't possible. And I do think that narrative change of looking at the glass half half full rather than half empty, like that did a lot for me.
Being a double amputee, when you are let out of hospital and you're going through physio, everything that we take for granted in life, it's quite simply walking, going up the stairs and all this, you have to learn again. And I interviewed, you'll have seen him, a guy called Luke Tarrant, who, he told me about the change in his daily routine of, even getting up now takes over an hour to get ready. Can you tell me about that kind of daily routine? What was that hardest first thing, or like those things that you took for granted that really started to take a longer time?
Yeah, I think, what Luke's touched on there is exactly the realities of being a double amputee. Like, I can't just get up in the morning and get out of bed. Like, otherwise I'd just end up flopping on the floor. Like, that's not how stuff works for me now. Now I need to get up, need to put my liners on, then I need to put my prosthetic legs on. If I need to shower, I need to navigate that scenario, and like all the little things. The little things for sure are the things that can sometimes, feel like a bit of a burden and a bit of a nuisance, because I know what life was like before the accident. I know how like easy and like the things you take for granted, how much time I would have on my hands if I didn't have to get up and have that sort of preparation time every morning and stuff like that. But that's just like reality. That's not going to change. So I think it's just about, making the best of that situation as much as you can, and learning to be happy and accept with where you're at with things. Like, it's so easy to, I think everyone, and I'm guilty for this as well, and this is something I really try and work on, is like not comparing myself like to others. Like, I always think whenever you start looking, at people, social media is a big thing in our world. Like, comparison, it's just like, it is the thief of joy. Like, and for me, it's so important to not get caught up in all of that, and just to focus on making your life the best life it can be, and just focusing on yourself. And naturally, I feel like if you do that and you're positive with what you've got going on, the people around you just accept that, and it just helps that feeling grow.
Not dissimilar to doing your Ironman, in any place, you've got a team and a support network around you. And that must have been of paramount importance in that those early days and stages of recovery. What did that support network look like, and what did it mean to you? Because there are, in those, as you say, early weeks of things we take for granted, learning to get up the stairs, you need people there to help you in those early days.
Oh, massively. I was so dependent on others, which is a position that I didn't particularly enjoy being. I was 17, turned 18 when I was in hospital. Like, you're just getting to that age where you want independence, you want that freedom to go out and do things by yourself and not have to worry a bit about being treated like a kid, like you're an adult, a young adult at that point. And all of a sudden, like you say, walking was something that I needed a physio like holding my hand the whole way through. I needed like my mum there just in case I fell to the other side. If I was going to appointments, I couldn't drive. So again, my mum was crucial in just taking me around to different appointments. Even though our house where I live, it's a slightly older house, so it wasn't really fit for purpose for a wheelchair. So when I was in hospital, I needed my dad he went away and basically made it fit for purpose so I could get around as easily as possible. And move my bedroom downstairs, everything like that. So it was all those little things that sort of stacked up, or my support network coming through for me, which made a massive difference. And they all stepped up. I think naturally when you go through like a big, traumatic moment like that, in the face of that adversity, I think it's easy it would be totally reasonable to see how people would struggle with that. But I'm just grateful that the people I had around me, they didn't shy away from it. They like just went for it full on to help me as much as I needed and as much as possible. And yeah, it was crucial.
Another thing that I try and look at is perspective, because whilst this accident very much happened to you, as you say there, it affects a lot of people around you, particularly your family who care so deeply for you. But what they need to be is a pillar of strength to help you. But I have no doubt there are emotions of vulnerability and weakness of theirs. Have they ever shared that with you now and after, and where they were mentally and what their vulnerability looked like?
Oh, yeah, massively. Yeah, it's something that we've talked about quite a lot. Particularly my mum. My mum like basically became like this military, like efficient operation when I had my accident. She was so like to all my friends and family. Even when I was in hospital, in Nottingham, so it was about 3 hours from home. So my friends all basically came up, for a couple of times, all together. And before they went into the room to see me, mum was like big smiles, positivity, because my doctor Tom, again, he sort of said to my mum that how people react to Billy is how Billy will react to his situation himself. So again, whenever anyone came into the room, it was always just about them being positive and, seeing the good side of things and just keeping smiles and that positive energy in the room. And that definitely told for me. But I think through those early, probably 6 months where my mum sort of had to bottle up all her emotions, it meant that after about 6 months, when I kind of got to a stage where, we knew things were, going to be okay, and I was going to be able to, walk again and get to a stage where I could be independent, and she was going to basically get her son back and not, this person going through this traumatic event. That was where she started to, the emotions started to get on top of her, and she had to, speak to someone and go through her own sort of dealing with that trauma, which is totally necessary. For me, it kind of, in a way, I feel kind of lucky in a way, because that this thing happened to me, my life changed. It showed me how many great people I had around me. But the actual decisions and the real sort of, traumatic moments, I had, but it wasn't so impactful in a way where I had my accident, the surgeries were done whilst I was asleep, so I didn't have to be involved in, someone saying, we think the best quality of life you're going to have is if you have to amputate your legs. Do you want to go through with it? Like that as a decision as a 17-year-old would have been totally such a huge traumatic thing to deal with. But I was in the hands of people that had the best information and made the best decisions for me. And I woke up and everyone was being positive around me and trying to support me as much as possible. I didn't have to, go through those moments when the doctor said to my family, like, yeah, Billy's going to become a double-amputee, he's going to lose his legs, and have to, comprehend that. So in a way, it does feel slightly surreal, the whole experience for me. But yeah, I feel like I was quite lucky in a way.
Given your early success as a racing car driver and your kind of mindset to that, being in that professional sporting world, you must have been pretty well in tune with your mental health. You must have had a very good mindset in terms of approaching that. Do you think, given your background already and success as a teenage sportsman, helped with your recovery? And do you think it would have affected you differently if this happened to you had you not been a sports person?
I definitely think being competitive and trying to, be the best in anything is a good tool to have for life problems. Like, if you're trying to be the best at anything you do, then when you, like you say, you face these problems that happen and creep up in normal day-to-day life, it's not like it doesn't take over your entire being, because underneath that all, you're like, well, I'm trying to be the best at this. So like you just end up focusing on different things rather than focusing on like any problem that comes your way, no matter how big or small it is. So I think that it definitely did make a difference for me, having that sporting background. But it's interesting what you said about like, as a sportsman, around the mental health side of things, like, oh, you must be like equipped to deal with that, because I don't always feel like that's the case. Like, obviously sportsmen, you're equipped to deal with, you're resilient, and there's a lots of tools that you have, but I feel like mental health is quite a specific thing. And like, it's easy in a way, when you're a sportsman, to sometimes shut off your emotions, and then you see it with people coming out of sport when they're retiring, and all of that stuff sort of hits them there, and they have this real sort of moment of vulnerability, and they're dealing with all that sort of mental stuff that they've put to the side because they're a sportsman. So I agree, it's helped me in some ways, but I don't think, being a sportsman, it's not like a set in stone thing to sort of fix, like, and having any sort of issues around mental health.
So how are you then with showcasing vulnerability?
I think I'm better at it now. I think after my accident, in particular, I found it quite difficult, because I was the same person I was before the crash. All of a sudden, people had different opinions of me. I was this inspiration. Like, I'd get that message quite a lot. And as a 17, 18-year-old, that's quite hard to deal with. You feel like all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure attached to that sort of statement. It's like, why am I an inspiration? Like, I'm just a normal 18-year-old who loves racing and, has had this crash. Like, so particularly in the first few years, found it really difficult to deal with that sort of tag that people gave me. And I didn't know how to behave and how to react. Like, I felt the pressure of that. Well, now I think I'm much better at being myself, being vulnerable. And I think that that's super important. Like, if you're going to be someone who people look up to, like, better to be yourself as much as possible and not get caught up in what, how other people look at you, but just be yourself and be the person you want to be. And hopefully that is good enough for others.
No, I love that. I asked this to Luke, so I feel obliged to ask you, because I was genuinely interested. Amongst all the trauma and the hardship that you actually have to go through, there are some perks. What was the best part about
The blue
that?
badge is pretty good. Yeah, parking where you want. That's pretty handy. Skipping queues, like,
Oh, I would love that.
skipping queues is pretty good. What else is there? I'm sure there's
It's
more.
always good to look at the little, the little cherry on top.
There's some little wins in there. Yeah.
I love that. Given that you were very much an athlete and in sport, at what point in your recovery was your motivation to get back in a car? Or did you always think you were going to?
Definitely not. So I remember coming out of the coma, getting to a stage where I could actually comprehend and understand, like, the conversations that was going on. And yeah, at that point in time, I didn't really think about racing, like, again straight away. Like, I watched my accident because it obviously happened live on TV. So I think that, again, that was a tool that I used to help speed up my recovery and dealing with it. Because rather than sort of shying away from wanting to see the crash, I wanted to see it. I wanted to see if there was anything differently I could have done. When I realized there wasn't, again, it felt like a bit of weight off my shoulders, where it was like, okay, it's just one of those wrong place, wrong time moments. Like, me as a competitor and sportsman, I couldn't have really impacted that or anything like that.
But run me through your emotions the first time you got back into a fast car. Like, I know that there was times before that you were not, but could talk me through that, because there is that full circle moment.
Yeah.
And that is, I can imagine you are almost going through everything, but then just thinking about what you mentioned there, of you're very good at, in a way, detaching emotion. So talk me through that experience of getting back in a fast car?
Yeah, I do remember the first time. It wasn't even the fastest of cars, but when I got my license back, which was 11 weeks, my race license, 11 weeks after my accident,
Wow.
at Brands Hatch, I was driving a VW Beetle Fun Cup car, which compared to a Formula 4 car, which had my accident, and quite different. But I generally, emotions, like you say, it's sometimes like when you deal with things and you try to detach emotion from things, all of a sudden, like I was dealing with all this other stuff outside of, my comfort zone, which was being behind the wheel of a racing car. And I remember getting back behind the wheel for the first time, and that comfort zone that I've been grown up and that's all I've known, and that's my like happy place. I remember for the first sort of few laps driving this car with controls that were completely different and everything like that. I just remember having the overriding feeling of being like a bit scared, because the comfort zone and the thing that I knew how to do best all of a sudden didn't feel quite as comfortable as it should do or it used to feel. And I remember just having a bit of a moment where, like I say, that fear was there, where I was like, I don't know whether can I drive a racing car again? Like, is this even, doable? And then after a little while and a bit of practice, you start to, build up that muscle memory and things start to come back to you and you start to feel more comfortable. But I do remember that initial feeling of like, I'm scared about driving this car because this doesn't feel comfortable anymore.
So in that whole journey of your recovery, there are always constant wins and you are overcoming barriers. And there's also those barriers of, the first time you got back to the race and people probably thinking, oh, he's not gonna be that much competition, smashes a podium. You had to overcome the FIA ban, even down to the simple task of learning to walk up the stairs again. Do you feel that overcoming barriers is motivation for you, or that it's actually quite a frustrating thing that's what it is, you have to overcome things, or is that actually motivational for you?
I think it can be both. I think some obstacles in sort of that I've had to face since my accident are things that have given me motivation and have put a bit of fuel on the fire. I think some obstacles that, I'm just thinking of just being someone with a disability in like the modern world, like some things it is a bit frustrating at times, and it does feel like a barrier for the sake of a barrier, like that something that, there could be a solution for this and this could be easier for everyone involved. So I think it's just a bit of context around those different things, but yeah, I think it can be both.
We've talked about getting back in the car, you've done the Ironman, and it's a huge challenge. And I know that after that first Comic Relief challenge, there was the what next? I mean, is Team GB called yet?
Team GB, they haven't called me as such, but I think they know that I'm the idea of being, in the Paralympics and representing my country is something that intrigues me. So at this stage, that's where I'm at with it. It's something that intrigues me. I don't know how that's going to progress, how that's going to develop, but it's definitely something that I want to explore. Having done the Ironman and been as successful as I was, and it's just opened up that, my mind to there might be more opportunities out there in that space, and I got a lot from being involved in this stuff.
You mentioned it at the beginning where you finished a challenge and it's almost like, oh my, your life's now completely open and what have you. Do you feel like you're almost quite thirsty for a challenge now that it's parked for a while? Do you feel like you need something? You actually thrive in that routine and sacrifice despite it being so challenging?
Yeah, I do thrive off of like having a long-term goal, having a focal point. I think sometimes I'm easily distracted. Like I'm one of those people that I'll throw my hat to anything and I'll have a go at lots of different things, which I think is a good way to be. But equally, it does, sometimes mean that sometimes I give myself too much. I spread myself too thin across too many different things. And sometimes you got to know when you find something that you're really good at, to dial in on that. So I think this is probably the stage I'm at now where it's like, okay, I've got all of these different opportunities ongoing at the minute. What ones actually bring a lot of value to me and what ones are exciting and maybe cool, but that I could do without. And I'm kind of in that process now of keeping the stuff that I really want to keep in my life, and also maybe just getting rid of a couple bits that I gave a go but isn't exactly what I want to do.
talk about recharging. It's so important. What do you do now then to look after your mental health? What's this kind of like the nice things that you're like, yeah, I get to switch off and detach? I know swimming was and is indeed that, but what is it that helps you look after that?
I think for me, mental health, the only time I ever seem to like face issues with my mental health or things sort of to pop up is when I'm like not moving forwards with something, like anything. It could be anything in my life. It could be, a relationship, it could be a physical challenge, it could be a career plan, like, but I just need something where I feel like I'm not standing still. So yeah, for me, that's like the big focus is like just to keep finding those things where I feel like I'm developing as a person and I'm learning more about myself and just learning in general. I just want to learn and digest stuff all the time and get better and yeah, just be more knowledgeable. I think like that knowledge is such a, powerful, important thing, and it gives me a lot.
Well, speaking of knowledge then, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
Oh God, which one would I say?
Yeah,
It's a tough question. I don't know if one bit's really jumping out at me.
All right, well, I'll shift it slightly then.
Yeah.
What piece of advice would you give to somebody that has gone through a life-changing kind of traumatic experience?
We touched briefly on it earlier. A comparison is the thief of joy. Everyone goes through obstacles in life and challenges. Mine are very obvious. You can look at me walking down the street. If I've got shorts on, you can see I'm a double-amputee. You see my challenges. But equally, some of the strongest people that I've met have faced challenges that are hidden challenges and that they've had to deal with them. And you wouldn't, looking from the outside in, know that they've had to face these things. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that just because someone might, you might have a friend or you might have someone who looks like they've got everything worked out. No one's got everything worked out. Everyone's dealing with something. So try not to get yourself in the mindset of thinking that what you're going through is something that, no one else will understand. Everyone understands what it's like to go through things because everyone is going through things.
Yeah, it comes down to perspective and that kind of spotlight syndrome. You think, oh, this is all happening to me, but
yeah.
Promise you, everyone else is dealing with their own things.
Everyone is, yeah. And if they say they're not, then they're just really good at hiding it. Because from my experience, everyone I've met has, since my accident, and even people I look back on that I met before my accident, everyone had something going on that if they could, change it, or it was a less than ideal scenario, if it's an obvious thing, if it's not an obvious thing, they're still as hard to get through and to navigate, and you've still got to be strong enough to do that. So yeah, don't get yourself caught up in thinking that everything is just happening to you. It's happening for everyone, and if you're struggling with it, share that struggle with people and they'll share theirs with you.
Penultimate question, is there a role model that you still actively look up to? I know that I didn't know if the role model goalpost, so to speak, had changed either since accident or since taking on these challenges. I know that, of course, they're allowed to change, but I didn't know if there's anyone in particular that you look to for motivation or do see as a role model, because you yourself are one for others.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah, no, Lewis Hamilton's always been a role model for me, purely I say purely from a sporting perspective. That's how it started, but I feel like he's a person where that role model sort of element has changed over time, because he's done a lot of stuff outside of motorsport, and then obviously I've had the opportunity to meet him, spend time with him at the Grand Prix and see the actual human behind the sportsman, and yeah, he's definitely someone I look up to. There's other people like Alex Zanardi. He's someone that after my accident in hospital, when I was thinking of will I be able to race again, he was someone that became a double-amputee and then went back to racing again as well. So again, that sort of light bulb moment in hospital of going, where can I end up? Can I drive again? He was someone who proved that to me, that it was possible, and kept that dream alive. So he's someone that I look up to massively as well.
Final question, what does the word headstrong mean to you?
Headstrong. I think when you hear the word strong, everyone thinks that means that you've got like no problems. I think headstrong is accepting the fact that everyone has got stuff going on in their minds, in their lives, but they're just accepting of that and deal with it head on.
Billy, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Really looking forward to the documentary coming out, which will be out in mid-March. And I have no doubt that anyone can still donate. Right?
Yeah, everyone can still donate on.
There you go. Thank you very much. There you go.
Yeah.